but I'll turn it on.
Ouch. Yeah, I
Hello,
tried using.
everyone. Yes, we're getting settled.
Yeah.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second weekly, whatever this is, podcast, broadcast with the man with two first names, Isaac George, and myself.
Hi, Ryan.
Hi. Today we're going to talk about White Tigress Tantra, immortality, and goodness knows what else, because I don't even know what White Tigress Tantra is, so I'm excited to learn. And yeah, apparently Isaac is a bit of an expert on this and sundry topics. So how you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. It's been a busy Friday over here. Doing client stuff, doing this, that, and the other, doing music stuff. Haven't been on music stuff as much as I want to today. But yeah, I think we picked a good topic. We've narrowed it down. We have so many different flavors and colors to play with.
Right. And I think the more specific we get, the more fun it will be.
Yeah, we can really get our teeth into it.
So you want to explain what White Tigress Tantra is?
Well, I'm going to hold up. I don't have that book. It's still in my book box downstairs. I do have the companion book, the second book that was written by this author, but I will explain it. Hopefully this isn't coming out backwards.
No, I can see it. That's good.
The mirror image thing. Okay. It's called The Sexual Teachings of the Jade Dragon. Now I have a caveat here. I have never immersed myself into the practices that would have been done in the traditional Taoist sense. But let me give you the background. Back around 3,000 years ago in the western part of China, this is when Taoism was in its full flower in China. But most people in the West are only familiar with male Taoist practices, or Taoism in general. The whole idea of the Book of the Tao, which is, in other words, roughly translated from Mandarin or Szechuan, is the way, or the universe, or God, or unity. So it is sort of the word that describes what yin yang is, the balance of forces in nature and in the cosmos. So what most people didn't know until probably the late 1980s is that there was a female sect of Taoism, a left-hand path, as it were, like Tantra. Whereas the male side took cultivated sexual energy in order to raise the Jing, the spiritual energy, and use that in meditation. And when they did have sexual intercourse with women, with a consort, it was to generate as much yin energy in the feminine so that they could draw on that. This all sounds sort of vampirish and predatory. That's exactly what the whole thing was basically taken from the perspective of alchemy. I mean, it was from Taoism that we get acupuncture and most Chinese herbology and all the rest of it. Okay, Chinese medicine and acupuncture charts and meridians and all the rest of it. So their entire focus was not just on enlightenment, but immortality within the physical body. Of course, women were excluded from that. They were seen as a vehicle towards this end, a means to an end, which eventually backfired. And there was a tradition started in Western China called the tradition or the practices of the Great Western Royal Mother. And the Great Western Royal Mother basically sought to empower women during this feudal era. And so they formed their own Taoist practices and their own convents or gathering places, their own trainings, their own disciplines, predominantly just for women, and in the sense of training them to become immortalists, to be able to extend their life, but also to extend means not, immortalist in their philosophy wasn't to live forever in a physical body, but to extend life and stay as youthful as possible for as long as possible. So their end result was to merge heaven and earth, to merge the divine and the human, to accept and embrace both in their philosophy. So the philosophy had to include sexuality, but in sexuality with a different twist from the way it was approached in the male Taoist tradition. So the women saw the masculine and the essence of the masculine in the form of semen as a substance that carried with it jing and fire. And it was to use that energy to be able to raise their vibrational level, to youthen themselves. They had their own self-work practices to create what they called the perfect willow waist, or the perfect breasts, or the perfect sheen of hair, the perfect skin. And essentially these practices were outlawed eventually by, guess what? When communist China happened in
Real?
1940.
Yeah, like they got rid of pretty much all spiritual, religious, everything, as far as I know.
Exactly. So they drove this sect underground. It had already been pretty underground for a long time through the era of China, the emperors and stuff. But the emperors actually went to this tradition. If you go back into ancient texts, they actually consulted these women to find out how the emperor could find out how to last longer in bed, or how to please his concubines, or how to actually the optimum time for trying to procreate. And they were considered wisdom givers. They were not persecuted. They were cultivated. Now, of course, the male Taoists saw them as competitors, strangely enough, in their tradition and their practices. So the women couldn't go to them for their practices. They would actually go out and find men in bars or on the street and offer to give them oral sex in order to cultivate their part of their cultivation practice, their sexual cultivation, rejuvenation practices. This book focuses on male revitalization. Basically, doesn't matter what your age or physical condition now, this book, and according to the philosophy in this, that is actually part of the White Tigress teachings, is to restore physical prowess, sexual prowess, predominantly for health reasons and for mental clarity, and with the end goal being spiritual realization and self-realization. So it got driven underground, eventually ended up in Taipei, in China, in Taiwan, where the author, who was an American-born male Taoist, practicing male from San Francisco, discovered this sect. He met some woman by accident in a bar in Taipei who was a member of a local White Tigress cult. And he eventually got an audience with the leader of the sect, and he was shocked to find out that even though he thought the woman standing before him was 33 to 35 years old, that she was close to 70 in age. And that piqued his interest from their end. And so he begged, borrowed, and steal, and pleaded, please teach me. And he got the inside track. I mean, he spent many years there studying, researching, learning the practices, and the Jade Dragon practices. And eventually got permission from her to come to the West, back to the West, and write these books. So I stumbled onto the sexual teachings of the White Tigress in Canada, in a Borders bookstore in Canada back in like 2002 or something. And when I read the first couple of pages, I went, Eureka, I found something I've instinctively felt and known for a long time was real. Now, interestingly enough, it came up right up against my romantic notions about love and sex. And because it had sort of a detached or maybe that's a rather Eastern or Chinese or Asian perspective, a rather detached form of looking at sexuality as a natural part of being human, but also one that is an energy to be explored, cultivated, and used for a particular purpose. Kind of like, building materials or something. So there is a certain reverence and a sacredness to it, but there also is a certain scientific curiosity and aloofness about it. So if a white tigress in training went out to sort of pick up men for her practices, it wasn't, she wasn't seen by the members of her own training group to be a prostitute, because she wasn't doing it for money. She wasn't doing it for money or anything like that. And eventually she would get to a place where she would have a Jade Dragon, somebody she could practice the alchemy with, but they did not actually have intercourse. Intercourse was actually kind of frowned upon as a way that drained women's energy, which is converse to, completely the opposite of Buddhist tantric practices or Western tantric practices. It's the reverse. But women were always encouraged to have, unlimited orgasms regardless. So it is a convoluted and rather alien perspective around sexuality and spirituality to our Western perceptions. And, but I found it endlessly fascinating and thought, this is a different way of looking at it. Their ultimate goal in terms of an experience, a psychic spiritual experience, was to actually achieve a state in which the mind completely stops, and what they envision or what they describe as seeing is thousands of swaying golden lanterns just going back and forth very slowly. And that was like that nexus point between this realm and the next. And that it was achievable by anybody if you knew the practices. But the best part of it, I found, was experimenting with the Jade Dragon practices, is that from a personal sexes meditation with self, process, it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. It didn't work. And, if anybody is suffering ED or erectile dysfunction, or they have absolutely zero libido, this will get you going. Because the practices in this book are quite phenomenal. And easy. They're not difficult. As long as you're not squeamish about trying something new or having your belief systems trampled on a bit. So, questions? Counter arguments? I don't know. This is a subject I've never spoken about publicly. My studies and my immersion into Tantra has been very sort of private and quiet and on the down low for quite a few decades. But I have to say that the Kundalini awakening that I experienced in 1994, the third of the three big awakenings, was predominantly driven by a falling in love experience. That's the trigger point, one of the trigger points, and was highly sexualized. But one of the best quotes that I mentioned to you that helped me make sense of this 8 years later after the event, was the quote that in a subsequent book that C. Lai wrote, was from an ancient text that was from like the 8th century, that these women Taoist monks were, talking to a male aspirant and saying, if you want to know and understand your spirituality, you have to accept and understand your sexuality. This guy wanted to be a Taoist monk, and he kept feeling guilty for, spying women who were bathing and getting all aroused. He was freaking out. So he went to the Western World Mother and had a conversation with her. Got an audience, and she said, You're absolutely winding yourself up for no reason whatsoever. Basically. Anyway, questions, comments, reflections, personal experiences.
Yeah, I mean, a million questions. So, and primarily, thank you so much, and primarily about your own experience with these things. So is this stuff that you're practicing alone or you're practicing with a partner? How does that work?
Well, I really only ever really got a chance to practice it on my own because I've never counted women who have read this book, or there actually are women in the United States who are proponents of this, have been through the training, and are teaching other women. They're few and far between, but I've seen their writings occasionally. They don't publish books or anything about it. I don't know if there's anybody on Facebook that's got a page. But in my personal relationships, or in the women who I've been with previous to now, either they go, ooh, I don't want to do that, or where's the love? Where's the romance? Because it isn't. It's not about that. It's not that you couldn't do this with a partner that you're in a relationship with. Excuse me. You could, but I haven't encountered that person who's that adventurous yet. Because it is sort of a role reversal thing. And I mean, it basically, the centerpiece of the practices with a male for the female is that it is all based and focused around oral sex. And, but it is a specific technique around that for the women to take the man into her mouth, or into her energy field, and actually work at it do it from an energetic perspective, not with the idea of anything but absorbing the masculine essence, the yang, for enhancing her revitalization and her practice. Most men would think, oh, well, I'm just getting used for nothing, and there is no upside here. And to a certain degree, that part of the practice as it was done in the ancient times, I didn't totally agree with, or didn't feel was respectful. It felt to me like they were just trying to get back at the male goddess for what had been happening to them, to their gender for the last few hundred years. And maybe that was part of the motivation. I don't know. I can't say. But I just know from my personal work with the self-cultivation, self-revitalization exercises in his second book for the Jade Dragon for men, they're profound, and they do work. They do work. They work better than just about anything I've encountered in Western Tantra.
So can you describe describe something here? Or?
Yeah, there are exercises for the penis and for visualization. There are specific exercises for helping blood flow. There are specific exercises for actually activating the hairline. So there's like these exercises where you would like rub your tummy with your right hand, your lower abdomen with your right hand, 36 times in a circular fashion to awaken the chi.
Mm-hmm.
And then with the opposite hand in the opposite direction, counterclockwise.
Mm-hmm.
So you do that 36 times each. And there is this specific number for every type of exercise, how many repetitions. Mm-hmm. Giving yourself an erection, and then basically slapping the penis from one leg to another 18 times per side. It's basically about circulation, raising energy. It's getting the furnace going. That's all it's basically focusing on. It's different for the women. They have a different set of exercises, a different set of disciplines with a different sequential number of repetitions. So I'm talking about only the male side here, because obviously I couldn't do the women's one. And there were visualization techniques, there were meditations of different kinds. And it just becomes sort of a practice, just like you would going out and doing exercise.
Right.
And it's an every morning thing, 15 to 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
There are no real props except for a piece of red silk that can be used tightening around the genitals or tightening around the glans penis to engorge it with blood and leave it there for a short period of time. You don't want to do it for too long, or you can create problems. You don't want to damage yourself. The Taoist traditions, which is the publisher of these books, and also they do have a line of different oils and ointments for enhancing both women and men, enhancing and beautifying the genital area. Now here's kind of funny thing that I thought was interesting from the women's perspective when I first read the first book, Sexual Teachings of the White Tigress, is that they recommend, or the part of the practice is the women completely shave their pubic area to give a signal to the body, taking you back, or taking the individual back to the way they were just pre-pubescent, just about there, to signal the body's hormonal system, hey, I'm young. Right. You know, hey, I'm young again. And it wasn't for any other purpose except to trigger different hormonal responses based on attitude and practice. Okay. One could say in this day and age of quantum physics and or even mystical traditions such as the Hawaiian Islands, the Polynesian shamans, is to say that, you know, wherever energy goes, form follows, thought follows. So wherever you put your focus on in these practices, the results become physically and experientially real. Over time, they are not quick fixes. This is not the blue Viagra pill in any way, shape, or form for men. And people, you know, in the West typically don't have the patience for it. All right. Whereas in the Western royal mother tradition, some women might be in this, you know, be with the Jade Dragon for 5 years. And part of their job in that agreement is the Jade Dragon, their partner, takes care of them financially so they can focus entirely on their spiritual and sexual practices, on their Immortals practice. They don't do anything else all day long, all night long, except that. He is the provider, he is the protector against any, you know, men who might be considered threatening or try to get more out of them, thinking she's some kind of low-class prostitute. So the Jade Dragon has to be accepting of the fact she's going to have other levels, other consorts. Again, this trips a lot of people's triggers in the West, especially those who have had strong Christian backgrounds.
Well, I can't imagine that.
Well, do tell. Anyway.
Oh my
But
gosh.
yeah, I you know, I don't know how, I don't really have to get too graphic to say that you have, I think what the biggest value of experimenting with this stuff has been is to butt up against my judgments, my taboos, my feelings of not accepting my body or my sexuality or, you know, my desires. I think that was one of the main things, is like the frustration of needs, the frustration of desires, which I've come to understand in the wake of studying Tantra or Kwadoshka, which is the Native American version, or this Taoist stuff, is really kind of partially what drives men to do insanely senseless and violent things, like trashing the planet, you know, or trashing women.
So what does, like, denying one's own the
natural proclivities, right? You know, it's like, you know, some people have a fetish for oral sex, some people have a fetish about feet, some people have a fetish about particular positions with a partner, you know, or wanting to experience a certain danger thing, so they'll go into BDSM, or having being in control, or being completely without any control. I don't know. I've never experienced that. It's never been a drawing card for me. But if as a male, if you love women and you love sexuality and you just love love, and you put that into it, then I think really you sort of become a lens for love. You become a lens. You rather, it's not just about Ryan the person or Isaac the person. You become a lens for that ephemeral and mystical thing called capital LOVE. And in that spirit, it was a little bit later on that I ran across it was just around the same time. It was around the same time I ran across somebody named Julia Carter, who is not associated with this particular subject matter, who brought into being a form or spiritual set of consciousness rituals called the template. And it was in one of her early tape recordings. And the first ceremony, it was ceremonial stuff. And the first ceremony is called the Ceremony for Original Innocence. So really, in a sense, when you drop all of your civilized programming and indoctrinations and belief systems, you return to the Tantra that your soul naturally knows. You follow your instincts, which are inherently good and non-predatory and non-violent and non-coercive. The partners or the universe will respond to you in kind. It's like you'll be welcome because you're non-threatening, right? As a male, you become non-threatening because you're taking responsibility for your own needs, your own desires, you're respecting yourself, you're loving yourself. Then how can you be a threat to anybody else? One of my spiritual mentors at the time, when I was going through a period in which I couldn't understand, and actually I look back through my whole life, even back to my teenage years, women coming to me with their problems with their boyfriends and wanting to talk, and I'd be sitting there going, I don't know why I'm telling you all this. It's because, as she described, she says, you're a himsa. And I went, because at night, she says, no, it's a Sanskrit term, means profoundly harmless. So if anybody calls you, ahimsa, don't think that they're having some sort of conniption fit. It just means you have no desire except to give pleasure or give respect or give love or ecstasy. Ecstasy is an incredible alchemical ingredient to spiritual transformation. And I think that's what the Taoist, this particular psychosexual practice is about. It's the White Tigress Jade Dragon path, ain't for everybody. But I think it really has been, the mere fact it's lasted so many hundreds and thousands of years, has obviously produced results that are lasting and beneficial.
Including immortality.
Well, I know that's a touchy little subject.
Great, let's do that.
Yeah, let's live forever. I think the immortals, the idea is, again, I think they can call it immortality. I think it means living the fullest and richest life as you possibly can, and staying as youthful and curious and playful as you possibly can. I don't think it has anything to do with, I'm going to be Lord Voldemort and I'm going to live forever and everybody else has to die.
Well, it doesn't, like you said, they're for everybody. If everybody wants to do it, they can do it. So what did the books?
They can explore it. Yeah.
What do the books talk about? Are they talking about literal immortality, or do they say, well, when we said immortality, we actually mean something else?
No, that was my take on what they were meaning. I don't know if there's any recorded lifetime of any of these female practitioners or masters who lived like 400 years. I have no idea.
So the books don't talk about that, or?
No, they don't touch on that. I think the whole idea of the Immortals practice, I think if I vaguely remember, one of the passages in one of the old manuscripts had to do with the fact that this was a preparation for death and for continuing on into the next realms. And so they saw immortalism as not being just in this physical vehicle. Entering the immortal realms in a state of pure and complete awareness and not forgetting anything from this lifetime. And not coming back here with astral amnesia going, why am I here again? What's going on? What is it? So basically it was a preparation. I think that I recall that now. So it's a preparation to move on to the immortalist realms without any baggage or need to come back into this experience.
Fascinating. Such a big topic in so many religions, like what the next thing is, or what the goal is, whether it's heaven or releasing yourself from the cycle of samsara, or so hearing about this, I mean, I've been around the block as far as, or I thought I had been around the block as far as sexuality and tantra and things like this, but I've never even heard of this before today.
See how well hidden it's been. Anyway,
yeah,
but you have been around the block. You've been around the block, 10 or 20 blocks I've never been around. At least that's my perception.
Well, I'm definitely fascinated by. I mean, and this whole thing. This is pretty much all I want to talk about from now on. Is all of these very esoteric spiritual and sexual practices. Like, I would be happy just like talking about this and bringing different people on and talking about this forever, because it's infinitely deep. It goes on. Everything is sex, as someone famously said. I think it was Oscar Wilde. Everything is about sex except sex. Sex is about power, which is also the fascinating idea for me, the fascinating topic for me. So anyway, but yeah, like this stuff sounds amazing. How long have you been doing this?
I haven't really been doing it as much as a practice since probably 2013 or 2014. But I brought the book out, the Jade Dragon book out, because it's like, I think it's time to get back into this stuff. I'm going to be 69 years old this June.
And how many years did you kind of practice this on sort of a daily basis before that?
Probably about 10.
So you've been doing, all right.
About 10.
Oh my God. So you were doing this for 10 years and you noticed, like the results for you included what? Like what differences did you notice?
Always being ready to go.
All right. Permanent arousal, or very, very all right. Always being ready to go. Yeah. Awesome.
Being vital, being inhabiting my body completely, for one.
Right. That's a huge one for men.
Being in fantastic, really kind of fantastic health and vigor for my advanced years. I think it actually does create a euthany. I think it does. It does. Yeah. And I was also an avid meditator and also been watching my diet, and I stopped smoking in 94, and I stopped drinking hard liquor, and I stopped chemicals and all the rest of it. All those things contribute. But I think this practice grounds the soul and the energy field more deeply into the biology, these practices. And I think that is part of the philosophy of immortality.
So have you ever met and talked to people who are doing this, or is it all from books?
Okay. I wish there are some gathering places in San Francisco and New York where you can meet and greet other aspirants and practitioners and teachers. I've never been to one. I would have possibly explored that if I hadn't moved to Scotland in 2004. A few years after I found the books. So.
Right, I doubt there's groups like this in Scotland, right?
Well, no, but there might be in London.
Right.
There might be in London. I've never pursued it, but I imagine. See, that's the nice thing, is that there is actually a kind of a clearinghouse through Tao traditions in New York. I think they're in New York or Boston. You could actually probably find people through them who are practitioners or teachers in your area, your state, your city, whatever. I think they're out there. I just don't think they advertise themselves in the same way that the Neo-Tantra movement does.
I know. I suspect that there's, in every tradition, culture, through history, etc., there's some set of sexual practices, explorations, and they've just been brutally suppressed and or gone underground and or
or
so
modified.
yeah,
Yeah.
lost.
Mhm.
What do you mean modified?
Modified by Western temperaments
Right.
and sensibilities or sensitivities.
It goes into our mind and then we translate it all, and it's like the Native Americans when the Europeans came and say, okay, we're going to buy this land from you, here's some beads or whatever, and they're like,
And blankets.
right, and some blankets. They're like, what, okay, cool, but what does that mean, buy land, right? We don't have that idea. So
Yeah, that concept is completely alien to them.
so the same thing for us when we start talking about transmuting energy. Well, that's the thing. That's why one of the reasons I want to learn Sanskrit. There's virtually no words for states of consciousness in English, but like the different way, like they say, I don't know if this is true or not, but they say Eskimos have 40 words for snow or whatever, right? And we don't have really like even words for, we start with the genitals, the vajra or the lingam or the, but what do we have in English? The cock, the penis. Like it's like, what is that? Is it medical? Is it kind of like dirty, like schoolyard? Is it, slang, right? But other languages have like this whole massive structure of, states of consciousness or sexual levels, or like all these things. Like when we start talking about, well, how was your samadhi today? How was yours? How was your, or what is it different from your, these awakening, the 7 levels of awakening or enlightenment, or like all these things we're trying to translate into English. We don't have phraseology for it. We can't talk about it. And as they say in 1984, if you don't have words for it, then you can't talk about it and you can't think about it ultimately, right? Things are
Right.
good, or they're more good, very, very more
Double plus good.
double plus good. Thank you. Double plus good, right? And so you're reduced to that, and that's our language is being dumbed down, and that's probably been going on for thousands of years. But you're talking, and then it gets brought in with alchemical concepts.
Right.
I love that, like we're talking about, okay, you mix the lead and you make the gold and whatever. Well, we're actually talking about states of consciousness, and maybe sexual practices and idea, like and all of this alchemy description. That we have to actually invent language to be able to do this, and if you don't have that language, people can't talk to you. Like you can't talk about it in the normal society, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's always a holding back in the West about not wanting to ruffle feathers. I
Yes.
mean,
Mm-hmm.
there was a book, one of the books that came across my path in just before the turn of the 90s into 2000, called Ecstasy Through Tantra, by a yoga and tantric teacher. He was also a GP. He was a physical doctor and surgeon
Mm-hmm.
from Australia by the name of Dr. John Mumford. And that book was an eye opener too, because it was the first time I read anything by a tantra teacher who disputed the idea that of the yogis of India or the tantric masters of Tibet, that men should, it's ridiculous. It's a psychological trick to think that if you ejaculate, you're going to lose your energy, and it's going to take so many days for it to build back up again, and you're going to set yourself back for months or years in your spiritual practice and all this stuff. And sorry, Montauk Chia, I don't know if you ever run across his stuff. He got his inspiration from Dr. Stephen Chang, and Dr. Stephen Chang was not as radical as Montauk Chia. So the student becomes a little bit more authoritarian than the teacher. And I did study that stuff too. And the thing of it is, some part of it always felt a little off and a little super uber controlling. And then, but John Mumford came out and said, "This is baloney." He's been leading, doing tantra stuff for decades, and is a yoga teacher and everything. And he says, he pretty much hit it right on the head without saying it. But what I felt was, what comes into this alchemical process is that if our attitudes are skewed or programmed in a certain way, we're going to get a different outcome. We're going to get a different result. We're going to have a different experience, or we're going to feel guilty, or we're going to feel, oh, people are, that's a bridge too far. And he was very upfront about it in the first chapters of his book. He says, if Westerners had to encounter the initial upwelling of the tantric movement in India in 500 AD, they would have been thinking, oh, this is just a Hollywood 1970s sex orgy party. Everybody's drinking and smoking hash and gobbling up food left, right, and center, and sleeping with whoever they want, moving on to the next partner. And he said they would be completely like, oh, this is degrading and debauchery, and this isn't spiritual. They wouldn't recognize it as being tantric. When actuality is at that time, that movement was trying to throw off centuries of oppression by the Brahmin priesthood and control. And the only way to do it was to go to the absolute extreme in trying to reach the divine without any of the rituals and dogma of the Brahmins. So the whole thing was merging with everything, completely accepting everything. Tantra being basically a yoke or a yoga embracing all opposites.
Right. It's that non-dualism. It's not bad. It's not wrong, etc.
Exactly. Anything one. Virtually anything.
What you're talking to is what caused me to write those 7 essays on sex and power, and that is that sex is the key for personal human power. What do you think about these ideas?
True.
All right, moving on.
I think it's true. I think it's true because I think what we as humans have done is labeled it as being something not as spiritual as spiritual.
I love it.
Okay.
Not spiritual, right?
Right. In other words, we are all still carrying around and suffering from the Adam and Eve story to some degree or another. Okay. Sex got us into this pickle in the first place.
So yeah, I mean, do we see the eating the apple as a sexual act? Is that how you interpret it? Okay.
Well, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, I think it goes a lot further beyond that. I think it's been interpreted or presented in that way by the Roman Catholic Church originally. I think it was, foisted upon the public in a way to manipulate their perceptions in that manner. I think it has a much deeper and actually more sinister connotation. Sexuality is not the problem. It can be the solution here, guys and girls. It's not the problem. The problem is what was the intent, or how is this energy used? To me, a star going supernova is having a bloody orgasm. It's the same fission reaction that happens when a man and love make woman. Man and woman make love between a man and a woman, or a man and a man. I don't know. Orgasm is that transmutational explosion. It's that place where the ego goes, I'm out of here. Meditation shouldn't be seen as antithetical or antithetical to sexuality, but in too many cases it has been. Sublimation is good in short doses. You can sublimate your sex drive to, accomplish something or create something, but you're still using sexual energy. You're still having sex, all right? It may be, autoerotica in some way, shape, or form if you're working on a project, but it's still sex. Galaxies colliding, or stars blowing up, or planets colliding, it's still this interaction problem. And when you get it down to the subatomic level, it's quarks, right? And what happens when one quark encounters another? Well, they may be light years apart 10 seconds later, but they'll still be imprinted with each other for all eternity. Those two subatomic particles will be like, oh, I miss you. So I think that the potential is that if we can not separate the sex thing from the disaster that's happening ecologically with species extinction on the planet, or the way we're dealing with each other in terms of social media or fake news, or I think this has to be part of the conversation. It has to be part of the conversation. Because if we had a loving, sexual, erotic, more erotic relationship with nature, I don't think any one of us would think that somehow or another we're separate from it. We're inherently connected to it. We're intimate with it. I think the pagans were more intimate with the planet, with nature, than we have ever been in the last 7,000-8,000 years. Well, certainly since the rise of Christianity in Europe and the demise of the pagan cultures. I'm speaking here because I'm physically here. I'm in the UK.
Right.
I'm in the cradle of Celtic Druid practices. And they've all been cleaned up. They've all been made nicer, more acceptable. You know,
there's a big move towards the primal or the wild. We're feeling this, that we want to ecosexuality.
I heard that.
Right. We have friends talking about, how do we touch our wild essence, our wild sexual, we're done with that boring vanilla sexuality. We want to explore the wildness of passion, and we also want to explore nature. And yeah, there's a big movement towards getting back to the roots, as it were, as also, right, plants' roots. There's something to be said for that, and stripping back all of what we've been taught and conceptually around what sex should be and with whom and all of that. So I don't know if you're
touching on the polyamory thing there in a way.
Yeah.
Or non-exclusive,
for example.
Non-exclusivity, responsible non-monogamy. Don't we come up with the greatest terminology?
Yeah, I talked to Deborah Anapol about that. It was interesting how it all came about and came together.
I know. Yeah, I met corresponded with Deborah for a while. This is a bit of a sidetrack, but met her in Hawaii with my ex. We met, we chatted, got together a couple times and talked. Fascinating. And then my ex-partner actually spent quite a bit of time with her in the last year or two before she passed. She fantastic pioneer. Recommend her books to anybody. So with this idea of the wildness, if we're talking about we could save the planet, or we could at least assist the planet in saving herself through rewilding projects.
Rewilding, right.
Bringing back the marshes, rejuvenating the marshlands, stop cutting down all the damn trees to make grazing land for McDonald's hamburgers.
Right.
Replanting trees, rewilding, letting estates here in England, instead of them being manicured to hell, let them go wild, let the animals come back, let the insects get a foothold again. And what's really interesting in you bringing this up is by reconnecting to trusting nature, we can trust our sexual proclivities or interests or feelings. And I think we have to kind of get over ourselves a little bit in terms of the possessiveness that is inculcated into our mindsets about what does this mean if I have sex with this person, or what does that mean? Is it going to mean, we're a couple, or we're together, or we're not? Or, if I look at somebody else, am I betraying my love and my relationship that I'm already in? I think we're at that cusp as a species where we have to come into a new relationship with our sexuality, or we will not healthily progress into creating something to replace what we no longer like, or what we see is not working anymore as a societal prerogative or direction. So I think it's important. That this whole question about wilding, letting yourself go wild. What does that mean? I think we're afraid to lose control, at least in the West.
How do you reconstruct a new world if you're disconnected from your senses, right?
I think the senses, you cannot do that. You cannot understand or have empathetic capacity for what is possible, much less for what has already happened.
Right.
You have to have that empathetic, possess a willingness to drop into what is the planet feeling like today?
And what does my body feel like today?
What are the signals my body are giving me today from, the fact the Schumann resonance is going crazy, we're having a geomagnetic storm, or the rest of my collective family on the human race is going through absolute anxiety and depression because everything's going weird and everything's going to hell in a handbasket. I think people give themselves lots of excuses to stay distracted, whether it's this
Right.
damn
Well, yeah. Yeah. The Black
this
Mirror,
damn
right?
thing, or what's on Netflix tonight, or I'm going to go to the gym and work out every day for an hour and a half after work, you know and I'm going to have CNN on the TV set over my treadmill the whole time. There is no space for slowing down enough to find out where you really can feel good and feel where you're hurting, much less where you can find pleasure, where you can drop into the ecstasy of just your being. And if you can't do that, and you can't empath with yourself and with your surroundings, you can't empath with another human being. Whoops. Now we find out where we think intimacy is happening is nothing more than not I love you, but I'll trade you. I'll trade you. Look, we're doing a business deal here. Pleasure for pleasure, stroke for stroke, affection for affection. It's kind of mutual masturbation, really. It's not really lovemaking. It's not really connection. We're all really yearning for connection.
Yes.
That's the numero uno thing in this conversation or any conversation around sexuality. It's connection. It's being seen. It's being seen, really being seen, and really being accepted. And it starts with each one of us. And taking that risk of telling somebody you're really attracted to them, and they're going to go, what are you trying to do, a Harvey Weinstein on me? Bugger off, and you're going to feel terrible. You're going to feel rejected. But I think you don't stop trying to accept and love who you are, and know that at some point the mirroring is going to come. The connection will come.
I remember that was like, I remember in college, probably before that was how I did things. I just walked up to someone and said, I find you attractive. I'm attracted to you.
What happened?
Like,
tell us.
I've always been like that. I've always been like, what is there to beat around the bush about? Everyone knows what's happening. Might as well just say it, right? And
good for you. I was terrified.
Well, I think it was a bit the thing that I did. I was a little bit the Tony Robbins thing, where you watch the people who are doing things and getting the results that you want, and you just kind of copy them.
Uh-huh.
And at some point, I was feeling my personality. I remember 7th grade, and I was a shy, scared kid, and I was also attracted to women. And I saw
7th grade, so that's what, 12, 13?
Yeah, so we're talking about
Okay.
12ish, 11, 12. So right after, right as puberty began to hit, I remember 6th grade was kind of when it got going, and 7th grade was in full swing.
The fire engines were out of the station, racing down the street.
Yeah, exactly. Tell the stories, Ryan. All right, everyone's telling me to tell the stories, so I got to tell some stories. But anyway, yeah, and I just remember, okay, I'm all of a sudden attracted to these girls, and I'm so shy, and I'm not getting any, they're not coming to me. That's for sure. So what do I do? And so I kind of watched the guys and how they were acting, who seemed to have the attention.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, oh, well, I'm just going to flick a switch and be like that. And so
bold.
What? Yeah.
Bold.
Yeah. And all of a sudden I was like calling everybody darling and sweetheart and flirting, and so that was the thing I tried to do, and that was when I was really, and it worked more or less, right? Except I was in a very repressed environment, of Mormonism, where you can't really go anywhere with any of these feelings or explore, or no dates allowed, etc., etc. So I did it within that framework. But then, in college, I was just like, oh, I like you, I'm attracted to you. And then I would just watch to see what happened, and those people, some people vibed with it. Some people were like, "Oh, okay, now what?" Like was a bit confusing, a bit state breaking, or however you want to say it. And but yeah, like how would it be if we could all just do that, right?
Your mic's on.
How would it be if we could all just do that, right? Just like say how we're feeling with anybody at any moment. I kind of have the feeling like that's kind of the tribal, the native cultures. That's how they work.
They still do. Some of them are still do on the planet, and the women initiate more than the men.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay, huge topics. We just scratched the surface. Our time is running out.
You know where we could take that. We wanted to do a part two. I think the monogamy polyamory question is definitely hanging there.
Yeah. All right. So that's a huge topic.
That's hanging there.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's
as
kind
far
of
as,
hanging there.
okay, as
Yeah,
far
go
as
ahead.
primal or natural or poly versus, yeah, okay.
Yeah, instinct versus structure.
Right. Okay.
Maybe. Yeah, we can do this offline, but basically it's so broad and so connects to so many things.
Oh, it goes forever, doesn't it?
Just about.
Awesome. Wow.
But
Okay.
it's activating, and I think the activation is this is a dialogue that needs to happen. It's you've been certainly doing it with your interviews, and I applaud.
Yeah, including us. Thank you. It's fun.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's put a bookmark in poly versus mono, primal. I liked how you said instinct versus structure, society versus nature, all of these things. That's a great thing to look at for next week.
Yeah, let's do that, and we can definitely do the earlier time slot next week.
I prefer being awake, and we'll figure out how to do that.
Well, we'll find a happy medium.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for watching, everybody, in your comments. So signing off from the United Kingdom, this is Isaac.
Thank you, Isaac, for being here. And yeah, this was a blast, and looking forward to next time.
Yeah, me too. All right.
All right.
Have a great weekend.
Take care, everyone.